The first sound I remember that night was the slow chime of cutlery meeting porcelain, like a delicate clock counting down to something no one had scheduled. The dining room glowed with that particular golden light people call flattering, yet it made me feel exposed, as if the chandelier itself could see through my thoughts. My father sat at the head of the table, straight as a column, a smile pressed neatly onto his face. My mother had chosen the seating plan with her usual precision, as though harmony could be achieved through geometry. I had been placed near the end, far enough to be visible but not central, the way one arranges a vase that does not quite match the table. It was his 70th birthday. Every detail announced achievement, legacy, and order. The crystal glasses caught the light like trophies. The silverware was heavy and deliberate, engraved with initials that had passed from generation to generation. I had polished the same initials once as a child, back when I still believed belonging was earned through effort. Now I simply watched them shine under someone else's definition of success. Felicity, my older sister, was already speaking about a development project in Lisbon. Her voice carried easily across the room, confident, practiced, meant to impress without appearing to. Her husband nodded with the rhythm of a man who knew when to agree. Around them, the family leaned in as if absorbing light. I listened quietly, tracing a pattern on the edge of my napkin. I had learned long ago that silence makes people underestimate you, and underestimation is a kind of armor. When the toast came, I raised my glass as expected. My father's speech was short, practical, and full of metaphors about building, striving, and passing torches. He did not look at me when he said the word legacy. I drank the wine anyway, letting it warm a space I did not plan to fill with conversation. Beside me, my phone rested on the tablecloth, its black screen reflecting a tiny version of the chandelier. I had forgotten to silence notifications. Oliver, Felicity's son, reached for it, bored and curious in the way children always are at adult events. Before I could stop him, his small finger brushed the screen. The phone woke, the light cut through the soft candle glow, and one line of text appeared, an email header. Portfolio update, Doyle Art Holdings, valuation at $23.4 million. It was not a loud notification. No ping, no buzz, no alert, yet it might as well have been thunder. Conversations froze mid-sentence. My father's knife stopped above the roast. My mother blinked as if her glasses had fogged. Felicity's mouth hung open just enough for the reflection of the screen to shimmer against her lipstick. In that moment, every fork, every candle, every pair of eyes in the room seemed pointed at me. My father was the first to speak. "Is that some kind of joke?" His tone tried for amusement but missed by a wide margin. "It is not," I said softly. Oliver looked at me, confused, sensing the storm he had summoned. "I didn't mean," he began, but Felicity cut him off with a hand on his shoulder. She turned toward me, her expression stretched tight in polite disbelief. "We must have missed a detail," she said, her voice wrapped in velvet. "Since when does your art thing reach numbers like that?" I reached for the phone, turned it face down, and smiled a little. "Since I stopped calling it an art thing." That earned a few nervous chuckles from the younger cousins. My mother did not laugh. She was studying me as if I had just spoken a foreign language. "Brianna," she began carefully, "what exactly is Doyle Art Holdings?" The chandelier's light trembled across her pearls. For a second, I considered explaining everything. The years of restoring forgotten works, the silent partnerships, the collectors who trusted my eye. But explanations never work when people have already written your story. So instead, I said, "It's something I built, that's all." "That's all?" Felicity's voice sharpened. "You mean to tell us you've been hiding this from the family? For years?" "I wasn't hiding," I said. "I was working." The air thickened. Even the sound of the fountain outside seemed to pause. My father leaned back, folding his hands in the slow, deliberate way he always did before deciding if someone deserved approval or correction. "You should have told us," he said. "We could have guided you, helped you make wise choices. Large sums can become dangerous if not managed properly." "I've managed fine so far," I replied. He frowned at the answer, not because it was disrespectful, but because it was independent. My mother exhaled through her nose, the way she did when students gave partial credit answers. "Your father means well," she said. "We only wish you had shared. Family means transparency." I nodded once. "Family means many things." The words fell into the silence like small stones. Felicity exchanged a look with her husband, then leaned closer. "Let's not make this dramatic," she said, her tone smooth again. "If there's been a windfall, maybe we can discuss cooperation. You know the new education wing in Lisbon I mentioned? It's short on funding. You could make it a Doyle family initiative." I took a sip of water, though my throat was dry. I don't think money makes a good family project, I said. Her eyebrows rose. Then what does? I didn't answer. I looked at the reflection of the chandelier in the water glass. Light broke apart and reformed, like truth bending through pressure. My father spoke again, the final authority in every household matter. Explain what Doyle Art Holdings is exactly. I want to understand where this came from. I'm not sure you do, I said quietly. You've never been interested in what I do. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. The silence became a second presence at the table. I breathed in, tasting the rosemary and the tension. Then I said simply, I work in preservation. I identify and restore art that people overlook. Sometimes they turn out to be worth more than anyone imagined. For years. Felicity asked. For years, I said. She gave a soft, incredulous laugh. And you never mentioned it once. You never asked, I said. Her husband shifted in his chair. That kind of money doesn't come from restoring furniture, he said. You're sure it's all legitimate? I looked directly at him. You'll have to define legitimate. My mother gasped softly, scandalized by the tone, not the question. Felicity's face hardened. We're just concerned, she said. You live alone, you barely socialize, and now you're talking about millions. It's unusual, Brianna, it's worrying. I appreciate your concern, I said, but it's unnecessary. My father leaned forward again. Don't be ungrateful. We're offering guidance, not judgment. I smiled a little. It sounds very similar. His chair creaked as he sat back. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine. I could almost hear the unspoken words collecting around them, selfish, strange, secretive. Words they had used about me in rooms I never entered. The chandelier buzzed faintly, a soft electrical hum, like static before lightning. I stood up, folding my napkin slowly. My mother looked up, startled. Brianna, where are you going? We haven't finished dinner. I think I have, I said. Felicity sighed. There you go again, always leaving the table when things get serious. I met her gaze. No, I'm leaving when they stop being kind. The room stilled again. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. My father said nothing. He just watched me with the kind of disappointment that used to shape my entire sense of worth. It didn't reach me now. I placed the napkin beside my plate. I owe this family love, I said softly. I don't owe it access. For a moment, even the chandelier seemed to dim. Then the hum of the heater returned, the faint clinking of silverware resumed, and the world began pretending nothing had happened. I turned toward the terrace doors, the glass cold under my fingertips as I pushed them open. The winter air met me like truth, sharp, clean, unfiltered. Behind me, someone tried to laugh to break the tension, but it came out brittle. Outside, the garden stretched in pale moonlight. I could still hear the echo of their voices through the glass. They had already started whispering. They always did once they believed I was gone, but I wasn't gone. Not yet. The moment I stepped outside, the noise of the house folded behind me like a curtain. The air was colder than I expected, the kind of cold that bites at the edge of breath, but wakes every nerve it touches. I stood on the stone terrace, staring at the garden lights scattered across the lawn like fallen stars. The fountain still whispered its slow, circular language, a sound that somehow felt older than every argument happening inside those walls. Through the glass doors I could see them, my family, frozen in the frame of that glittering dining room. My father was talking now, his lips moving sharply while my mother listened with the stillness of someone trying not to cry. Felicity had turned to her husband, her face animated with disbelief, and even from this distance I could see the sharp gestures of her hands as she spoke. It was like watching a play I had already seen too many times, same cast, same script, same ending. I wrapped my arms around myself and let the night breathe for me. The scent of pine drifted from the garden, and for a second it almost felt peaceful. But peace, I've learned, is never pure when it follows exposure. It's only the silence between waves. My phone vibrated softly in my palm. I glanced down, expecting another alert, maybe another curious message from someone inside. But it was something else, an email banner across the top of the screen. Subject: National Art Preservation Institute, Geneva Summit Confirmation. Message preview: Your discretion remains our greatest asset. For a moment, I forgot the cold. The subject line felt like a hand on my shoulder, steady, grounding. The Geneva Summit was one of those invitations that circulated only through whispers and encrypted calls. Directors, curators, historians, people who knew how fragile memory could be. I had been asked to join not as a collector, but as a patron. An anonymous one. They didn't know that Brianna Doyle was the same woman who restored lost pieces for auction houses under another name. that the quiet shop I owned in Boston doubled as the front for a private fund supporting preservation projects across Europe. That Doyle Art Holdings wasn't a company born of luck. It was built from 10 years of sleepless nights, of quiet negotiations in languages I only half spoke, of patience disguised as obsession. My fingers tightened around the phone. I could still hear faint voices through the glass, my sister's laughter cutting through like a blade polished to shine. It struck me how different the two worlds were, one full of performance and the other of purpose, and how I had spent years trying to stand with one foot in each, until tonight forced me to choose. I took a slow breath. The cold air bit deeper, and yet it felt like something I needed, a shock of truth after too much politeness. I looked up at the windows again. Felicity's reflection met mine for half a second before she turned away, and that single movement sealed something inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. I walked down the short flight of steps that led into the garden. The heels of my shoes clicked softly against the stone. Somewhere behind me, the door opened, and a faint wash of warm air brushed the back of my neck. "Brianna." It was my mother's voice. I turned. She stood in the doorway, framed by light, her shawl clutched close around her shoulders. She looked smaller than I remembered, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. "You can't leave like this," she said. "Your father's upset. Felicity didn't mean?" "She meant every word," I said gently. "And that's fine. At least she's honest." "Please," she said, stepping closer. "You know how this family is. We worry. We try to help. You've changed so much we don't know how to talk to you anymore." "Maybe you don't need to talk," I said. "Maybe you just need to listen." Her eyes glimmered in the light from the dining room. "We're family," she whispered, as if saying it could make it true again. I smiled faintly. "Yes, but family shouldn't make you feel like a stranger at your own table." She looked away then, toward the fountain, pretending to watch the ripples. I wanted to hug her to bridge that space that had grown between us, but I knew the moment I did, she would ask me to sit back down, apologize, smooth everything over. Pretend the night never happened. I couldn't go back to pretending. "Good night, Mom," I said quietly. "I'll call you tomorrow." She didn't stop me this time. I walked past her, through the gate at the side of the garden, where the air smelled of wet leaves and winter soil. The gravel crunched under my shoes, the sound of small finalities. By the time I reached my car, the frost had started to form on the windshield. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my coat, the glass squeaking faintly. My reflection stared back, not the dutiful daughter or the eccentric sister, but someone I was still learning to recognize. I started the engine. The headlights cut a path through the fog curling along the driveway. As I drove away, the house shrank behind me, its lights softening into distance until they looked almost peaceful again. It was strange how beauty could survive even when warmth didn't. The road stretched ahead, lined with bare trees that reached toward one another like quiet witnesses. My phone buzzed again, another email, this time from a gallery in Florence. They had accepted the restoration proposal I'd submitted 3 months ago under my alias. My lips curved slightly. The world outside my family still moved with quiet rhythm, untouched by their disbelief. The hum of the tires on the road reminded me of the workshop back home, the faint vibration of wood against steel when I sand a frame, the low music of creation. I realized then that everything I loved made sound without noise. A brush against canvas, a whisper of dust, a sigh of varnish drying. When I reached the city, it was almost midnight. My building was dark except for the small lamp I always left by the window. Inside, the air smelled faintly of linseed oil and paper. The studio was exactly as I'd left it, canvases stacked neatly against the wall, sketches pinned above the workbench, a half-cleaned brush lying across a palette like a sleeping hand. I hung up my coat and stood for a moment, listening to the hum of the radiator. It was the opposite of my parents' house, quiet, simple, unadorned. And yet every inch of it belonged to me. Every object had a story I knew by heart. The old chair in the corner had once belonged to a forgotten sculptor in Prague. The cracked mirror above the sink came from a theater dressing room in Paris. I had restored them both not to sell, but because they reminded me that beauty often hides in things abandoned. I sat at my work table and opened my journal. My hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear but release. I wrote a single sentence across the top of the page. "Silence is not weakness. It is precision." Then I closed the book, poured myself a cup of tea, and watched the city outside my window. The lights blinked like slow-moving stars. People were still awake somewhere, chasing or escaping something, just like I had been. My phone buzzed once more. It was a message from Jasmine, the student who helped at my shop on weekends. "Hi, Brianna, just making sure you got home safe. I closed the register and left the invoices on your desk. By the way, someone called asking if you'd consider a guest lecture next month. I told them you don't like public events, but they said they'd pay for travel. I smiled. I hadn't decided yet. Public meant exposure, and I had built my life around invisibility. But maybe invisibility wasn't protection anymore. Maybe it was isolation. I turned off the lamp and leaned back in my chair. The room glowed faintly from the city lights outside, painting the ceiling in soft gold. Somewhere far away, I imagined the dining room at my father's house, the chandelier still burning above the half-finished cake. They would still be talking about me. I could almost hear Felicity saying the words I had grown up hearing. She could have done so much more if she'd just listened. Maybe. But tonight, for the first time, I felt that I had listened, just not to them. I whispered the words aloud to the empty room, testing their weight. I owe them love, not access. It sounded stronger than it had at the table. Maybe because here, no one could interrupt. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and let the quiet settle over everything. Tomorrow, I would reply to Geneva. I would confirm the flight, finalize the schedule, and pack the documents I had been too cautious to share. But tonight, I allowed myself something simpler. I walked to the window, pressed my hand against the cold glass, and watched the city breathe. It was imperfect, cracked, unpredictable, exactly like every piece I had ever chosen to save. And for the first time, I understood why I had spent my life preserving what others threw away. Because that was what I had been trying to do all along. Preserve myself. Morning found me before the alarm did. Light pressed through the blinds in quiet bars, and the radiator murmured its soft song. I lay still and let my eyes adjust to the ordinary geometry of my room. Books on the sill. A rolled canvas against the wall. The empty teacup I had not carried to the sink. The city had already begun its steady breath. Tires on wet pavement. Voices below that rose and faded like a tide. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my mother and 1 message from Felicity that did not bother with a greeting. We need to talk. Family room at noon. She had sent it at dawn, as if urgency could rewrite what happened the night before. A second message arrived while I watched the screen. Bring documentation. It felt like a summons. I made coffee and stood by the window while the kettle clicked and sighed. A delivery truck blocked the street for a minute, then moved on. I thought about ignoring Felicity, about letting the hour arrive and pass while I lost myself in the studio. But silence would not prevent them from deciding without me. And I had said last night that love is not access, not that love is absence. I showered, pulled on a dark sweater and clean jeans, and tied my hair back. No armor, only comfort. Before I left, I crossed to the work table and uncovered the small panel I had been restoring. A thin gold leaf line ran along the edge like a breath held and then released. I set a note beside it for myself. Varnish tonight. The promise steadied me. Outside, the air smelled like rain that had missed its chance. I walked to the corner bakery and carried a warm paper bag home. Butter and cinnamon filled the stairwell. I ate standing up at the counter. I wondered for a moment what would be said about me at noon. I wondered what I would choose to say back. I rinsed the cup, put on my coat, and left before I could decide to stay. The drive north felt shorter than it had the night before. Trees lifted bare branches across the sky as if measuring the morning. When I turned into the long drive, the house looked the same, which is one of the tricks houses play. They hold their faces even when inside them everything is moving. The front door opened before I reached it. My mother stood there with anxious hands and a careful smile. She hugged me as if hugging were proof. Her perfume carried lemon and something powdery from our childhood. She stepped back and searched my face for anger. I offered her steadiness instead. It was the only gift I had that would not be misread. In the family room, the curtains were drawn to let in the winter sky. My father sat at the end of the long sofa, his posture composed as ever. Felicity occupied the chair nearest the window, a manila folder on her lap. Her husband had a tablet awake and ready on the coffee table. 2 cousins hovered near the door and then pretended they needed something in the kitchen. My mother took the rocking chair by the bookshelf as if nostalgia might help. I sat on the low ottoman opposite my father. The carpet had a pattern I had traced with matchbox cars when I was small. A knot here, a swirl there, a perfect loop. I almost smiled at the memory. Felicity cleared her throat and began without apology. We all said things last night that were emotional. Her voice was calm and professional, the voice she used for negotiations that required a touch of sympathy. We do not want conflict. We want clarity. She opened the folder and slid a single page to the center of the table. A simple chart. Columns for assets, oversight, distribution. She continued. The family believes the best path is to formalize what exists. We can fold your company into a family office. You retain day-to-day authority. Major moves require collective approval. Percentages can be discussed, but in principle we think a 30% contribution to shared initiatives is fair. In exchange you receive support, legal structure, protection. Protection from what, I said? Exposure, she said, mistakes, reputational risk. Her eyes flicked to my father as if the phrase belonged to him. My father spoke without looking at the paper. This is not about punishment, he said. It is about stability. We have always been stronger together. His voice found an old cadence, the one that filled living rooms full of board members. He nodded to his son-in-law, who tapped the tablet and rotated it toward me. Graphs, projections, boxes drawn around my life. There was a time when that would have loosened my confidence by a notch. There was a time when numbers presented in lines and colors made me feel young and unfinished. Today they only looked like shapes drawn over something they did not understand. I kept my eyes on the tablet for an extra second for courtesy. Then I raised my gaze. I appreciate the concern, I said. I appreciate that this feels like care. It is not. It is a transfer of authority away from me. I do not consent to that. Felicity leaned back. So you would rather remain independent and unadvised with a sum of that size? Her tone sounded patient, then disappointed, as if she had rehearsed both. I am advised, I said. I am audited. I am compliant. I am not alone. Just because you cannot see the room does not mean it is empty. My mother shifted in her chair and the wood made a small sound. She folded her hands in her lap. Brianna, she said softly, we have been afraid for you for a long time, not just because of money, because you live so far from us, because we do not know the names of your friends, because we do not know what makes your days bright. Parents fill silence with worry. It is an old habit. I looked at her and felt something loosen in my chest. I thought of showing her photographs of the studio, of the class I might teach if I agreed to teaching. I thought of telling her about the Florence Gallery and the way the director writes thank you notes by hand on thick paper. I kept those thoughts behind my teeth. Today was not a day for gentle trails. Today was a day for edges. Felicity placed another page on the table. Tax implications, she said. Exposure to fraud. The art world is full of shadows. How can we be sure you are protected? The we was not family. It was shareholders. It was optics. It wore love like a silk scarf. I waited before I answered. Waiting is a way to let the water clear. When I spoke, my voice was even. I am not asking you to be sure. I am asking you to accept that your certainty is not a requirement for my life to proceed. My father's fingers tightened once and then relaxed. The movement was small, the way the tide moves under a frozen bay. He said nothing. Felicity folded her hands and laced her fingers so tightly the knuckles went pale. She tried a different angle. Transparency builds trust. If you simply walk us through the structure, if you share the names of your partners and the locations of the funds, we can advise without taking anything away from you. No, I said. She blinked as if I had misheard her and was correcting the wrong sentence. No to which part, she asked. No to the premise, I said. Trust is not earned by showing my throat. Her husband let out a breath that might have been a laugh if the room were less attentive. He leaned forward. We are not your enemies, Brianna. I know, I said. You are not my owners either. My mother shut her eyes for a moment and opened them with a shine that made me look at the carpet again. She tried once more. What if we reset? What if we do not talk about charts? Just tell us how it started. Help me understand how my daughter built something like this while I was looking the other way. The room waited with her. I felt the urge to narrate like a wave moving up a beach. The first chair I restored. The night in Madrid when a bidder trusted my nod more than his own. The dusty studio in Florence that taught me patience in the language of light. The cataloging work that looks like boredom until a signature breathes out from under a layer of nicotine. I felt how much I wanted someone here to see me with the same eyes my students use when they lean over a panel and learn the difference between stain and age. I wanted to tell my mother that not telling her had not been a punishment. It had been a choice to protect something fragile until it could stand under questions. I looked up. I kept my answer small to keep it true. It started because I paid attention longer than anyone expected me to. It grew because I was quiet where other people were loud. Silence is not admirable, my father said. His voice held a soft disgust, the kind reserved for character flaws. It is evasive. Silence is a tool, I said. Words are a tool. Access is a tool. I choose which one to use and when. Felicity's mouth made the shape of a smile without heat. You think this is a matter of style. It is a matter of security. She tapped the folder. We can set up a governance structure in a week. You will be grateful for it when the first crisis comes. I met her eyes. The first crisis already came, I said. It happened last night when a family turned a dinner into an audit. She flinched at that and masked it by smoothing the edge of the page. My father finally spoke in the voice that used to end arguments when we were small. There will be no villain narratives in this house. We will not be cast as the obstacle in your personal legend. You have benefited from this family name all your life. I let that sit in the air. A truck rumbled on the road beyond the trees. A clock in the hallway marked seconds we could not return. When I answered, I kept my tone level. I have benefited from a roof and from schooling. I am grateful for both. My work, my company, and the rooms that now invite me were built with hours you do not see. That does not make you villains. It makes you witnesses who arrived late. Felicity glanced at our mother to recruit a softer voice. My mother did not look away from me. She spoke with gentleness that did not reach for permission. I do not know your rooms, I would like to. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I would like to be let in, but only if the door opens because you want it to. I felt my face change. The heat in my throat cooled. I nodded. Then I looked at the chart in the center of the table and slid it back toward Felicity with 2 fingers. Here is my offer, I said. I will not fold my company into any structure you control. I will not disclose the names of partners. I will not submit proposals for approval. I will invite you to my studio when the timing is right. I will show you what I do and why it matters. I will answer questions that come from curiosity rather than strategy. I will contribute to causes that honor our mother's life as a teacher. Not 30%, and not on a schedule that folds me into a family plan. I will choose projects one by one, and I will do it with my name on the gift and my hands on the work. Felicity drew a breath as if I had said something naive. She searched my father's face for a cue and found none. He looked at me as if I were a painting he could not price. It bothered him. He poured water and drank in 2 small swallows and set the glass down without a sound. My mother spoke the only sentence that mattered. Thank you for coming, she said. Not for agreeing, for coming. The meeting wanted a climax and did not get one. Charts need signatures to feel complete. There were none. My father dismissed the cousins who had drifted back to the doorway. Felicity gathered her papers and tapped them into alignment. She said we will revisit soon, and I answered we will not revisit this. We looked at each other without blinking. She shrugged and put on her smile again, the one she wears at ribbon cuttings. The room felt tired. I stood. My mother rose too, but did not reach for me. She looked as if she wanted to. I nodded to my father. He inclined his head the way men do when ceremony must fill the space where affection should be. In the hall, I paused by the family photographs and let my eyes rest on one from a summer by the sea. We were all sunburned and squinting. My mother held a paper cup of lemonade. My father wore a ridiculous hat. Felicity had a bandage on her knee and a grin too wide for her face. I was small and serious and holding a shell to my ear, listening for proof that the ocean could travel in a pocket. I smiled in spite of myself. Outside, the air smelled like wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I walked to the car with the slow steps of a person who refuses to rush away from places that once felt like home. My phone buzzed. A new message from Geneva held a list of attendees and a request for a short profile for the program. They asked for a single sentence to describe my work. I stood beside the car and typed. I steward neglected art into a future where it can be seen. I hit send and felt the strange lightness that follows a sentence that fits. In the driver's seat, I let my head tip back and closed my eyes. No one had won anything. No one had lost. A line had been drawn and remained. It was not dramatic. It was only real. I started the engine and turned toward the road that led back to the city. The day had come fully awake. Branches scratched the air like pens on paper. The sky held itself without asking for praise. I drove with both hands steady on the wheel, and the quiet in me kept its shape. I reached the city before the afternoon rush, and by the time I climbed the stairs to my apartment, the sky had turned the color of pewter. I set my keys on the counter, removed my coat, and let the silence receive me. The quiet of my home felt cleaner now, sharper, as if every sound still carried an echo of that family room. I brewed tea and sat at the work table. The small panel waited under its thin sheet of muslin. I peeled the cloth back and looked at the faint pattern beneath the varnish. The crack lines ran through it like fine rivers. I traced one with the tip of a brush handle and whispered to myself, "Hold steady." The act of restoration demands patience that borders on faith. Each stroke repairs something that once seemed too delicate to survive. It reminded me of the work I had just done with my family, painful, slow, but necessary to keep form from collapsing. My phone vibrated again. A message from Jasmine. "Hope your morning went better than last night. The shop's doing fine. We sold the French mirror to the collector from New Haven. He left a thank you note for you. I smiled, typing a quick reply, "Good work. I'll be in later this week." I put the phone aside, leaned back, and let the rhythm of the radiator and my own breathing settle the edges of thought. But peace never stays idle for long. A knock came at the door, light, uncertain. When I opened it, I found Felicity. She stood there in her wool coat, her hair pinned back the way she wore it for press conferences. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hallway light framed her like a portrait I had seen too many times, polished, symmetrical, and slightly blurred by distance. "Can I come in?" She asked. I nodded. She stepped inside, scanning the room the way she scans new property. "You live simply," she said. "It's enough." She looked toward the work table. "You still do this yourself?" "Every piece," I said. "Hands remember what machines forget." She set her bag down and took off her gloves. "Mother's worried you'll disappear again." "I never disappeared," I said. "I just stopped reporting in." She sighed and walked toward the window. "You could have told us you were building something that big." Do you know how ridiculous we sounded after you left? Everyone kept asking questions we couldn't answer. Dad felt humiliated. "Humiliation isn't my responsibility," I said gently. "It's the shadow of pride." She turned, the word catching her off guard. "You make everything sound poetic, Bri. It's exhausting." I almost laughed. "Only because you measure things in profit margins. Poetry doesn't fit inside your charts." She crossed her arms. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," I said. "I think I'm finally different, and that makes you uncomfortable." Her expression shifted, softer for a heartbeat. "Maybe it does." She sat down on the edge of the sofa and looked at her hands. "I used to defend you, when Dad said you were wasting your degree, when Mom called your shop a hobby. I always said you'd surprise us someday. I just didn't expect it to happen without us." The admission caught me by surprise. "Why do you need to be part of everything?" I asked quietly. "Why is my success a threat unless you can sign the bottom corner?" She stared at the floor. "Because that's how this family works. We own what we touch. We measure love by inclusion." "And exclusion?" I asked. "What do you call that?" She didn't answer. The radiator hissed softly. I poured tea into 2 cups and handed her one. She took it, fingers brushing mine, and for a moment we were simply sisters, 2 women sitting in the hum of a small apartment that smelled of paint and sugar. After a while she asked, "Are you really going to Geneva?" "Yes," I said. "What happens there?" "Conversations about art, history, preservation. People who want to save what time wants to erase." She smiled faintly. "You always liked saving things." "Someone has to." Her eyes drifted toward the shelves lined with old books and half-framed sketches. "Do you ever get lonely here?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But loneliness is quieter than judgment. It gives me space to breathe." She nodded, sipping the tea. "Dad will never understand that." I stopped asking him to. She set her cup down, stood, and walked back to the door. Before leaving, she said, "You could have told me first. I wouldn't have betrayed you." "I know," I said, "but I needed to see who I was without the family echo." She hesitated. "You found her," I smiled. "I think I'm still uncovering her, like a painting under too much varnish." She almost laughed, shaking her head. "Always the metaphors." Then her face softened again. "Send Mom a message, please. She's pretending not to worry." "I will." When the door closed behind her, I felt neither relief nor resentment, only a strange emptiness, the kind that comes after a storm when the air is too clean. I walked back to the table and touched the gold line on the panel. The crack had nearly disappeared, but if you looked close enough, you could still trace where the break had been. Restoration never hides what happened. It just teaches the eye to see the whole picture again. I cleaned the brush and sat down to write. Geneva's organizers had requested a short lecture on modern preservation ethics. The theme was simple: authenticity through repair. I opened a new document and began to type. Every act of restoration begins with humility. You cannot dominate what you wish to save. You listen, you observe, and then you move carefully, honoring the damage as part of the story. As the words appeared, I realized they belonged to more than the canvas. They were the outline of how I wanted to live. The clock near the window marked each passing second. Outside, the rain began at last, soft and steady. The sound filled the room like breathing. I let it. Tomorrow I would prepare for Geneva. Tonight I would keep the light low, let the varnish dry, and practice the only art that has ever felt true, learning when to mend and when to let go. The airport always smells the same: metal, coffee, and something faintly electric, like anticipation. I arrived before sunrise, the city still half asleep under a mist that clung to the roads. Inside the terminal, people moved with the quiet urgency of travelers who had already said their goodbyes. I like that: no drama, no ceremony, just movement. The flight to Geneva was half empty. I took a window seat and watched the tarmac lights flicker like tiny suns before dawn. As the plane rose through the clouds, the world flattened beneath us, cities dissolving into soft gray swirls. I leaned my forehead against the glass and thought about the conversation with Felicity. Her words had followed me all night like a second shadow. "You found her?" she had asked. I wasn't sure. Finding yourself isn't a single revelation. It's a series of small recognitions, quiet and inconvenient. Sometimes it happens while you're buying coffee, sometimes when you realize you no longer need permission to exist. Hours later, when the captain announced our descent, the mountains appeared below like folded paper. Geneva glimmered by the lake, calm and deliberate. I felt the same nervous energy I always did before entering a room full of people who knew more than they showed. But this time, I would walk in as an equal, not as the quiet assistant behind someone else's name. At customs, a young officer glanced at my passport and then at me. "Work or leisure?" he asked. "Neither," I said. "Preservation." He blinked, then smiled politely as he stamped the page. Outside, a black car waited with my name printed neatly on a small placard. The driver greeted me in French, then switched to English when he heard my accent. "Madame Doyle, welcome to Geneva. The Institute sends its regards." We drove along the lakeside road, past rows of stone buildings and cafes with chairs still stacked from the night before. The water shimmered like polished glass, and the mountains in the distance wore caps of white. For the first time in weeks, I felt a kind of quiet that wasn't loneliness. It was space. The conference center stood near the old quarter, a building of pale stone and glass designed to look timeless and modern at once. Inside, marble floors caught the light from chandeliers that hung like frozen rain. A woman at the reception desk checked my credentials and handed me a folder. "Your keynote is tomorrow morning," she said. "Today there's a private dinner for the directors." I thanked her and walked toward the elevator. My reflection followed me in the mirrored walls, same dark coat, same restrained posture, but my eyes looked different. Steadier, older. My suite overlooked the lake. From the window, I could see the city waking, sunlight threading through the mist. I unpacked only the essentials: notes, laptop, the pendant my mother had given me when I graduated art school, a small silver compass that had never once pointed north. I placed it on the desk beside the folder. The compass spun slightly before settling. It reminded me that direction and certainty were not the same thing. Later that afternoon, I walked to the Institute. The hall smelled faintly of paper, old wood, and wax, a scent I had always loved. Inside the main gallery, the restoration team was working on a 15th century altarpiece. Brushes moved slowly under bright lamps, revealing faint colors hidden for centuries. I stopped to watch, silent, as gold leaf caught the light like a whisper. A voice beside me said, "You always know which piece will stop people." I turned. It was Dr. Lemaire, the Institute's director, tall, white-haired with eyes the color of old glass. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I admitted. He smiled. "The ones who hesitate are usually the ones worth hearing." He gestured toward the altarpiece. "Do you remember what you told me in Florence? That restoration is not about making things new. It's about teaching time how to forgive itself." He nodded. "Yes, that line made the committee approve the funding proposal in record time." I laughed softly. I didn't know it had that much power. "Words are like varnish," he said. "Too thin and they disappear, too thick and they smother. You found the right balance." We walked together down the corridor lined with portraits of benefactors. He stopped before a painting, a woman in profile, her hands clasped, her expression both proud and fragile. "Do you see the pattern of cracks along the cheek?" "Spidering," I said. "Heat damage." He nodded again. "Her story reminds me of yours. Her family destroyed the commission that bore her name. It was rediscovered only because someone believed she was worth preserving." I looked closer at the painting. The woman's eyes were calm, almost defiant. "Who was she?" "Isabella Valette," he said. "She funded half the preservation projects in Florence, but she did it anonymously. They called her the silent patron." The words sank deep. Silent patron. I felt a tremor of recognition, like a mirror catching a hidden reflection. That evening, the dinner gathered 20 people around a long table framed by candles and crystal. Conversations flowed in several languages, threads of art history and philosophy interlaced with laughter. No one asked who I was connected to. No one measured me by last name. They spoke to me as if my presence required no defense. Halfway through the meal, Dr. Lemaire raised his glass. "To those who protect what others forget," he said. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. "And to the silence that lets beauty survive." The toast rippled around the table. I lifted my glass but didn't drink right away. My mind wandered back to the dining room in Connecticut, the chandelier, the stiff smiles, the moment of exposure, and I realized that night had been necessary. Without it, I might still be apologizing for my own voice. After dinner, I stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the lake. The city lights shimmered across the water, and somewhere in the distance, a violin played. I leaned on the railing and let the cool air fill my lungs. A message buzzed on my phone from my mother. "Your sister says you're in Switzerland. I hope it's beautiful there. Your father won't admit it, but he watched an interview about your work this morning. He didn't turn it off." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I typed back. "It's quiet here. You would like the view. Tell him thank you for watching." I slipped the phone into my pocket and looked out across the lake. The mountains were still there, unchanged and unbothered by human stories. Somewhere behind me, people were still talking, planning, debating the worth of memory. But for me, the moment was simple. The air smelled of snow, the water held the light, and for the first time in a long time, I felt entirely visible and entirely safe. I whispered into the night, half to myself, half to the world that had shaped me. Silence was never my weakness. It was the place where I learned to listen. Morning entered the lake like a slow breath. I woke before the alarm, stood by the window, and watched a thin band of silver widen along the water until the city loosened its shoulders. The keynote room was 2 floors below my suite, a quiet auditorium lined with pale wood and a ceiling that held light the way a museum holds silence. Backstage, the staff clipped a small microphone to my jacket and handed me a glass of water that trembled in its stem. A technician asked me to count to 10. I counted and listened to my own voice in the speaker, surprised by how calm it sounded. The organizer touched my elbow. He smiled the way curators smile when a crate opens without incident. When I walked onto the stage, the room was not full, but full enough. Restorers with careful hands, scholars with ink along the edges of their nails, administrators who measure time in budgets and seasons. The lights were gentle. I could see faces instead of glare. I began without telling them who I was, only what I had learned. Restoration is not conquest, I said. It is conversation. You bring the right solvents and the right patience. You ask what the material can bear. You accept that damage is part of the truth, and you refuse to repaint history into a lie. We are not in the business of making things new. We are in the business of helping time speak clearly again. I showed a slide of a panel that looked like a brown window. Then a second slide of the same panel after months of cleaning, the original blue breathing out from a film of smoke and neglect. I described the difference between crack and craze, between an old stain and a new one, between a mark that tells a story and a mark that was always a mistake. I told them that humility is the craft no one lists on their grant proposal. Questions came softly at first, then with the steady courage of people who have spent years listening to paint. How do you handle pieces that were once restored badly? What do you say to donors who want to see speed? How do you protect a small shop from legal storms that arrive with genuine gifts? I answered as precisely as I could. I admitted where I still fail and why I keep trying. The room felt receptive, like fabric that accepts a stitch. When I finished, the applause was not loud, but it was long enough to feel like a hand laid gently on my shoulder. People queued to speak. An archivist from Lyon asked about a cataloging method I had mentioned. A director from a small museum near the border asked if I would consider a visit. A student from Berlin simply wanted to thank me for saying that slowness is not laziness. I wrote her name down. I have learned to write down the names of the brave. At the back of the room, the Institute's assistant asked if I would come upstairs with the directors for a short conversation. Her voice was all courtesy and no weight, but I understood the invitation. Upstairs, a long table waited with porcelain cups that let steam rise in thin lines. Dr. Lemaire stood near the window with a folder beneath his hand. The other directors positioned themselves along the table the way old friends do when they mean to be formal and fail. "You were not what I expected," one of them said, and then seemed embarrassed by his own words. I smiled and told him I try not to be. We spoke in careful terms at first. The global rise of forgeries, the politics of export permits, the fear that the public is growing tired of old things. I said that the public is not tired of the past. The public is tired of being lectured by people who hide behind it. That produced a hush and then a small ripple of laughter. A woman with silver hair and a pen shaped like a needle leaned forward. She asked how we build trust with communities who grew up watching their heritage sold off in crates. "We give them keys," I said. "We put their own names on the registry. We pay them to decide with us. We assume they know more than we do, and we are grateful when they let us prove it. The silver-haired woman nodded and wrote something in quick script, as if catching a thread of thought before it escaped. After the meeting, the directors drifted away in pairs. Dr. Lemaire remained. He said he had a matter to raise that required the same discretion I have shown in other rooms. His hand rested on the folder as if it were warm. "We have 3 sites at risk this year," he said. "Flooding in an abbey that holds a library no insurer understands how to price. A chapel that needs stabilizing before the winter thaws. A town archive with a roof that can no longer argue with rain." He looked at me with a gravity that did not coerce. "We have had a protector for such moments. The protector does not care for plaques. The protector prefers clean invoices and a silence we do not break. There has been some question as to whether that tradition continues." I understood at once and let the understanding move through me before I answered. "Tradition continues," I said. "Tell me the figures." He slid the folder across the table but did not open it. He knows I do not need to see photographs to believe in leaks. His voice lowered. "I am told there is a garden in a small city far from here where a woman who gives nothing of herself in public once gave a student a brush and said, 'Keep your hand steady even when your heart is not.'" He was smiling now. "The student is on our staff. She said to tell you that the roof that kept her safe should keep other people safe too." I felt the old ache rise and felt it pass. "Send the details," I said. "The assistant can use the same channels." He waited as if I might say more, and when I did not, he simply nodded. "Thank you." His gratitude never wore a costume. It stood in the room like a chair that has held thousands of bodies and still does not creak. I left the institute and let the city walk me. The streets held the kind of order that makes your thoughts sort themselves without effort. I bought a small bread roll from a bakery that smelled like stories. I stood on a bridge and watched a swan use the river like a sentence. My phone buzzed once and I ignored it. The second time it buzzed, I looked, thinking it might be my mother. It was the institute's secure channel. 3 brief notes. "Abbey costed and ready. Chapel stabilized with payment schedule. Archive accepts terms and thanks you for remaining unseen." Below that, a single line from the legal office. "Confirmation received from Chamlea Europe SARL. Funds will route through partner trust by end of day." I stood very still on the bridge while tourists moved around me taking pictures of a clock made of flowers. The message was plain and careful and exactly right. The name sat on the screen like a secret that no longer belonged to anyone but the work. Chamlea, the camellia from my mother's blouses. The bloom that thrives in cold when other flowers bow their heads. I had chosen that word years ago to remind myself that beauty can look fragile and still survive every winter. I walked until the lake opened again and the mountains took back the horizon. The world did not tilt. The world did not raise its voice. It only breathed, and I matched it, and in the matching I felt something settle. The thing that had wobbled since the night at my father's table steadied as if a craftsman had tightened a hidden screw. Back in the hotel, my inbox held the usual soft chorus of thank yous, proposals, and confirmations. At the bottom was a message from Jasmine with a photograph of the shop window in Boston. She had arranged 3 small frames and a single porcelain cup beneath a handwritten card that read lessons in light. The reflection in the glass caught the street like a painting and me like a ghost. I sent her a note. "Perfect. Leave the card up all week." Then I opened the secure channel again to send one more instruction I had been resisting. The institute had wanted to name the scholarship that runs through my fund. They had offered the valet name after the silent patron whose portrait I had studied the day before. I typed a short reply. "Keep it unnamed. Keep it open. The students will know whose hands lifted them. That is enough." Evening returned to the lake with its quiet grammar. I reviewed my travel plans and set an early alarm. Before I closed the laptop, I opened a folder on my desktop that I rarely look at. It holds the letters from small museums and town halls and parish offices that have learned to write to a person who signs with a flower and not a name. I read 3 at random. Each one began with gratitude and ended with a photograph of a room that would still be dry by spring. The phone buzzed a final time. A single sentence from Dr. Lemaire. "The circle remains intact." I turned off the screen and stood at the window. The glass cooled my forehead. Below me, people crossed the square in lines that looked like stitches. The city mended itself as night fell. I thought of my father's dining room and the way light fractures on crystal, and then I let that memory fade. I thought of the student from Berlin and the way her voice shook and then steadied when she spoke. I thought of a roof that would no longer leak. The room was quiet, and the quiet felt earned. I said it out loud because sometimes the truth needs air. I am the person I once needed when I was small, uncertain, and unseen. I am the reason the lights stay on for work no one will sign. In the dark glass, my reflection did not look like a secret. It looked like a keeper of them. And that is how the first twist took its full shape, not a surprise to me, but as a revelation to the life that had tried to keep me smaller. The silent patron everyone thanked without a name had always been me. The snow had already begun to fall by the time my plane descended into Boston. Thin white lines streaked across the window, dissolving as they hit the glass. From above, the city looked like a gray sheet with corners curled by wind. I had seen the Alps, the cathedrals of Europe, the blue glow of centuries-old pigments reborn under my hands, yet the sight of these uneven rooftops still made something in my chest unclench. At the baggage claim, no one recognized me. That anonymity was both comfort and ache. I stood among strangers who were waiting for their suitcases and for someone who loved them. I was waiting only for quiet. Outside, a driver held a small sign with my name. "Welcome home, Ms. Doyle," he said, and I wondered what that word home meant anymore. He placed my single suitcase in the trunk, and we drove through the streets glazed with slush. Storefronts blurred by, yellow lights glowing through fogged glass. At every intersection, I thought I saw someone from another life, someone I had once been. When the car stopped in front of my building, the driver asked if I wanted help with the luggage. I shook my head. "It's light," I said, and it was. Geneva had given me something weightless, validation without spectacle, belonging without permission. In the apartment, the air smelled faintly of dust and paint. I switched on the lamp near the window. The studio greeted me the way old friends do, no questions, no demands. My unfinished panel still waited on the table, the gold leaf line perfectly dry. I ran my finger along it, feeling the ridges of what I had saved. I unpacked slowly, letting each movement anchor me. A few folded clothes, a stack of notes from the Institute, a brochure from the gallery in Florence, and the compass pendant my mother had given me, now resting in my palm like a quiet heart. I placed it on the table beside the panel and whispered, "Still not pointing north, I see." That evening, Jasmine came by with a folder of invoices and her usual wide-eyed energy. "You were all over the art blogs this week," she said, setting the folder down. "They're calling you the silent benefactor of Europe's restoration renaissance. Is that really you?" I smiled. "The blogs can call me whatever helps them fill space. But yes, I suppose that's me." She grinned. "Do you ever get tired of hiding in plain sight?" I laughed quietly. "Hiding is how I hear what people really think." She sat on the edge of the work table, her boots dusted with snow. "You could teach, not just guest lectures, a real program. People would come from everywhere." "I don't know if I'm built for classrooms," I said. "I like when things stay still long enough to listen." She studied me, serious now. "You talk about art like it's alive." "It is," I said. "Every piece I restore has a pulse. You just have to hold your breath long enough to feel it." When she left, I stood at the window for a long time. The city had buried itself under a soft white hush. The snow made everything honest. No cracks, no dirt, no noise, only surface and silence. It looked like peace, but peace has a way of disguising emptiness. I turned away and began cleaning the studio. Not because it needed it, but because movement fills absence. Brushes back in jars. Bottles aligned by color. Notes stacked, sorted, closed. I reached the shelf with old sketchbooks and pulled one out. The leather cover was cracked, the pages curled at the edges. On the first page was a drawing I had made at 23, a house by a lake with light spilling from every window. I had written beneath it, "One day, a place that feels like stillness, not solitude." I traced the line of the house with my fingertip. That version of me had believed peace was a destination. Now I knew it was a practice. My phone rang, breaking the spell. The screen showed an unknown number, international code from Switzerland. I answered, expecting it to be the Institute's accountant, but the voice was softer, older. "Ms. Doyle," the woman said, her accent clipped and graceful. "This is Marion Lemaire, daughter of Dr. Lemaire. I'm calling on behalf of my father." "Is he all right?" I asked, sudden tension tightening my grip. "He's fine," she said quickly, "but he insisted I contact you. He wanted to tell you that the chapel restoration, the one in Valence, has been completed. They uncovered something beneath the plaster, an inscription." I sat down. "What kind of inscription?" "It's a dedication," she said, "a name carved into the original beam. To the one who taught silence to endure." I couldn't speak. Marion continued, her voice gentler now. "He said you'd understand what that means." I swallowed. "I think I do." "We'll send photographs next week," she said. "He also wanted to thank you again for continuing the circle." After the call ended, I stayed still for a long time, listening to the low hum of the radiator. The words echoed through me like a melody played underwater. To the one who taught silence to endure, I thought of the woman in the portrait, Isabella Valette, the silent patron, and wondered if this was her message to whoever followed. Maybe every generation leaves a quiet signal for the next, a whisper across centuries that says, "I was here." I kept something alive. Later that night, I sat at the desk with the compass in my hand. I turned it slowly until the needle quivered, trying to find north but never quite succeeding. Maybe it didn't need to. Maybe I had spent too many years chasing alignment when the truth was already steady inside me. I opened my journal and began to write. Every act of preservation is a confession. You fix what you fear to lose. You hold it until it becomes part of you, and in saving it, you learn what you are willing to keep. Outside, the snow thickened, swallowing the last sounds of the street. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. 1, 2, 3 times. The echoes faded, and I found myself smiling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was protecting my quiet. I felt like I was sharing it. Snow kept its slow conversation with the city through the night and into morning. I woke to a quiet so complete it felt curated. The window had filmed over with a thin frost, and when I touched the glass, my fingerprint bloomed for a second like a flower refusing winter. I brewed coffee and sat at the work table while the radiator sang its low, familiar note. The panel lay where I had left it. I brushed a final veil of varnish across the surface and watched the light settle into it like breath. Jasmine arrived with 2 paper cups and cheeks bright from the cold. She shook snow from her scarf and set a stack of envelopes beside the ledgers. There were inquiries from small museums, an invitation from a community college, and a letter written in looping handwriting from someone in Vermont who had inherited a barn full of paintings and wanted to know which ones were real. Jasmine watched my face as I moved from envelope to envelope. "You are smiling," she said. "I am thinking," I said. "About a school," she asked. "About a room," I said. The word felt more honest than program or department. A room that stays open long enough for attention to do its work. She grinned and unfolded a sketch from her bag. "I have been drawing again. A floor plan, tables where the light falls best, cabinets with glass doors so people see the tools and respect them, a wall where we chart methods. Nothing fancy, clear, useful." I studied her lines. She had placed the work tables near the windows and left a wide path between them. People could move without shuffling each other aside. I pointed to a smaller square. "What is this?" I asked. "A listening desk," she said. "No phones, no laptops, just a magnifier and a notebook, a timer if someone wants it. 10 minutes a day of looking without touching." She hesitated and then added, "I thought you might like that. It feels like something you would ask us to do." "I do like it," I said. "I like it very much." We spent an hour sorting the letters into piles. When we finished, she pulled on her gloves and paused at the door. "Your niece called the shop after you left for Geneva," she said. "She asked if you ever take interns." She did not tell me who she was at first. Only after I asked her name did she say it. She sounded a little nervous, a little brave. "Sophia," I said. "Yes," Jasmine said. She said she loves textiles and has been teaching herself how to catalog antique lace. She also said not to tell her mother she called. I let the words rest in the room. They warmed the air in a way the radiator could not. "Did you give her my number?" I asked. "I told her to send an email," Jasmine said. "If you want, I can forward it." "Do," I said. "Thank you." After she left, I opened my inbox and found the message already waiting. It was short and careful. "Aunt Brianna, I know you are busy. I have been reading about preservation ethics and I think I want to do what you do. I do not know where to start. Please tell me if I am foolish." I answered without waiting for the perfect sentence to arrive. "You are not foolish. You are exactly on time. Come by the shop after school this week. We will begin with looking." I pressed send and felt something old shift inside me. It was not a door. It was a hinge. The day collected small tasks and carried them forward. I ordered supplies I had been postponing. I drafted a simple call for a winter session, 8 Saturday workshops, fundamentals of identification and care, sliding scale tuition, no prerequisites. I wrote it in plain language and taped the draft to the wall. The words looked right. I sent a note to the community center 2 blocks away to ask if their back room was still available for weekend classes. The director replied within the hour. The room was mine if I wanted it. He said he liked the way the shop window changed with the seasons and the way Jasmine waved at the kids who walked by with hot chocolate. "This neighborhood pays attention when attention pays it first," he wrote. In the afternoon, I walked to the center to measure the tables. The room smelled like chalk and winter air. Fluorescent lights hummed a little, but the windows were tall and kind. I stood in the doorway imagining people learning how to lift a frame without hurting it, how to cradle a book so its spine does not groan, how to see a paint stroke, and understand what the hand was trying to do. A woman from the front desk peeked in and said she would sign up if the schedule worked with her shifts. She asked if my class would require the courage to draw. I told her it would only require the courage to see. By the time I returned to the shop, the sky had drifted into early blue. A package waited at the door. Inside was a folder from the Institute, photographs of the chapel in Valence. The inscription was clear in the beam, "To the one who taught silence to endure." I traced the letters with my eye and felt the words settle into place in me as if they had always been there and only needed light. The phone rang. I answered expecting a student, but heard my father's voice instead. He said my name in a way that sounded less like possession and more like trying it on for the first time. He cleared his throat and told me he had read a feature in a serious newspaper about the Geneva summit. The article did not name me but described a benefactor who had kept several sites from closing. He said the word benefactor as if it belonged to people in portraits. He did not ask if that person was me. He did not ask for numbers. He said he was glad someone was paying for roofs while everyone else argued about walls. I leaned against the counter and let the sentence hold. "Thank you for saying that," I said. He made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement and then asked about the weather. We spoke about snow and flights and the bakery near my building that makes a crust he still likes. He said he would be in the city next month and wondered if he could see the shop. I told him yes. He said your mother would come too if you will have her. I told him yes again. When we ended the call, I stood very still until the air in the room felt ordinary. Then I wrote the time and his words in my journal. Sometimes memory needs help to believe itself. The next day, I opened the shop early to let delivery boxes dry their cardboard smell in the back room. Around noon, Sophia stepped into the doorway in a winter coat, a size too big, eyes bright and unsure. She held a notebook and a pair of cotton gloves. She said hello without looking away from the shelves. I placed the sign to closed and turned the lock. No one else existed in that moment except a girl trying to decide if she had permission to belong. We began with the simplest ritual. I set a small textile box on the table and asked her to breathe. She stood so still I thought the floor had taken her in. Then she opened the lid and looked down at a length of lace that had lived in a drawer longer than both of us. She did not reach for it. She described it instead. The shade of age the cotton had chosen. The weight of the air around it. The pattern that repeated and then dared itself to stop repeating. Her voice stayed low, the way a person speaks to a skittish animal. When she finished, I asked what it made her feel. She said it made her want to sit on the floor and listen. We moved through the first hour like that. Naming, pausing, writing notes she did not show me. I taught her the difference between a seam that mends and a seam that hides. I showed her how to let light find the thread without letting heat claim it. At the end, she asked if she could come back tomorrow. I told her yes, as long as she told her mother she came. She nodded, and I could see the battle begin behind her eyes. She said she would try. After she left, I felt love sit down in the room and act like it had always lived there. It did not ask for proof. It asked for the next appointment. That evening, an article about the summit spilled into the public feeds in a louder way. Someone had decided that anonymity was boring. They did not name me, but they did hint at a network of donors who favored European stone over American need. The comments filled with guesses and angles and the hot clang of grievance. I closed the browser before the noise could claim my concentration. The work does not change because a room begins to shout. I walked to the sink and washed my hands. I dried them on a clean cloth and returned to the panel. The varnish had settled as it should. I lifted the piece to the wall and hung it on the small hook I had installed before Geneva. The light found it the way water finds its own level. The phone lit on the table. A message from Felicity. It was short and less sharp than I expected. Sophia told me she stopped by. Thank you for not turning her away. I typed and erased and typed again. Then I wrote what I wanted us both to know. She is welcome here when she wants to learn, not when you want to manage her. We can talk another day about what managing has cost the women in this family. I sent it and set the phone face down. I waited for the sting of regret and felt none. The radiator clicked and kept its song. Outside, a plow drew a bright seam through the street and left a path where there had been none. I sat at the listening desk even though it was not official yet, set a timer for 10 minutes, and let my eyes live in the surface of a small porcelain cup. The glaze held a faint crack like a line of music someone had written under the glaze and forgotten to play. I stayed with it until the timer rang. Before bed, I wrote the notice that would go in the shop window in the morning. 8 Saturdays. Lessons in looking. Bring your patience. We will supply everything else. I taped the sentence to the glass and saw my reflection stand beside the words. I looked less like a keeper of secrets and more like a person who had decided which secrets deserved air. The night moved along its rails. A neighbor laughed on the stair and the sound drifted away. I turned off the lamp. In the dark, the room held me without asking who else approved. I thought of the inscription in the chapel beam and understood that the message was not only a dedication. It was instruction. Teach silence to endure, not to hide, not to surrender, to endure. I slept as if someone had tucked a warm card beneath the door that said welcome back. Saturday arrived with the thin light of late winter. I opened the shop early and let the radiator argue with the cold while I arranged brushes in a row like instruments waiting for their first notes. The sign on the window still read lessons in looking. I wondered if anyone would actually come. They did. At 9 o'clock sharp the bell over the door rang, and 6 people stepped inside. A retired librarian who missed the smell of old paper. A bus driver who had inherited a box of postcards from his grandfather. A young museum guard who said he wanted to understand what he protected. And Sophia, coat unzipped, hair tied back, eyes bright with something I recognized from my own beginnings, hunger to believe that care can be a profession. I welcomed them with tea and a smile. We moved the tables into a circle because circles teach better than rows. I told them there would be no grades and no rush. We would learn through touch and through patience. I watched their shoulders drop as if the permission to breathe were part of the syllabus. We began with a single object, a cracked ceramic bowl I had bought from a flea market. I set it in the center of the table and asked them to describe it without using the word broken. For a minute no one spoke. Then Sophia said, "It looks like it's remembering something." The librarian nodded. "It's a memory that never healed wrong." I felt the lesson begin on its own. We spent the first hour learning to see. To measure not with rulers but with respect. To read cracks as sentences. I showed them how a hairline fracture changes tone under different light, how color can hide beneath dust. They leaned closer, breath slowed, as if the bowl might answer if they were quiet enough. By noon the shop smelled of tea, linen, and a little turpentine. We took a break by the window, watching the snow turn to rain. The bus driver told a story about a seat he'd repaired on his route because he couldn't stand to see it splinter. The librarian laughed and said he should have been an archivist. For a moment the room was just people sharing reasons for why they could not walk past damage without stopping. After they left, I sat on the floor and looked around at the space. It had changed without moving its walls. The air was warmer, the light less clinical. Learning had left its own fingerprint. Sophia stayed behind to help clean. While she washed the cups, she asked, "Do you ever get tired of starting over with each piece?" I said, "No. Every beginning is a chance to be less afraid of imperfection." She nodded but did not look convinced. I handed her a cloth and said, "Fear keeps you steady until skill arrives. Then you thank it and let it rest." She smiled. "You sound like Grandma." The word landed between us like a bridge. I asked how my mother was. Sophia said she'd been painting again, small watercolors of the garden. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of roses that looked as if they'd been grown from light. I felt the unexpected sting of grateful tears. That night I called my mother. The conversation was gentle. She told me the roses were from memory, not from the yard. The real ones had died in the frost 2 years ago. "I paint them the way they felt, not the way they looked," she said. Then she added, "Maybe that's what you do too." We talked about the workshop, about Sophia, about how snow changes the sound of the world. When we hung up, I stood by the window until the city lights blurred. The streets were shiny again, reflections stacked on reflections. During the next weeks, the classes filled. The bus driver brought a friend from the repair shop next door. The librarian convinced her niece to join. Sophia grew more confident, correcting techniques with the kindness of someone who has finally found her language. We moved from ceramics to wood panels, then to paper and fabric. Every lesson became a confession of care. One Saturday, Felicity walked in. She did not announce herself. She stood by the door while Sophia and the others worked. I could see the hesitation in her hands. The same hands that once pointed accusingly across a table now hovered like someone approaching a sleeping animal. I offered her a seat. She shook her head and watched instead. When class ended, she said, "I wanted to see what keeps her here so late." "It's not me," I said. "It's the work. It holds people differently." She walked around the room, touching nothing, eyes searching for something to name. Finally, she said, "You built a church without walls." Maybe, I said, but we pray with our hands. She smiled faintly and left without another word. Later that night, she sent a text. Dad wants to come next week. He says he will behave. When Saturday came again, he did. He sat in the back beside my mother, both of them quiet as if attending a service. They watched Sophia demonstrate how to bind a tear in cloth with a needle no thicker than a hair. After class, he walked to the front and said, "You make patience look profitable." It was the closest he could come to praise, and I took it as such. That evening, we ate together for the first time in months. No long table, no chandelier, just takeout boxes and paper plates on my workbench. My mother told stories about her students. Felicity described a new foundation she was starting. My father listened. When he did speak, he said, "You were right about silence." I asked, "What about it?" He looked around the room at the brushes, the bowls, the students' work drying on racks. "It doesn't mean absence," he said. "It means presence without interruption." The sentence settled between us like a blessing. After they left, I stood alone in the shop and realized the space was no longer mine alone. It belonged to every hand that had tried, failed, and tried again inside its walls. The revival wasn't just about objects. It was about people learning how to be whole without erasing where they had cracked. I wrote a new sentence on the board for next week's lesson. Repair is not a return to what was. It is an agreement with what remains. The chalk dusted my fingers white. Outside, the street was quiet. Inside, the room waited for morning. The next week arrived with soft sunlight spilling through the tall shop windows. Snow from the previous weekend had melted into puddles that reflected the sky. I unlocked the door early, inhaling the faint scent of linseed oil and dust, and began arranging the tables for class. Each one held a small tray with cloth, brushes, and objects I had selected to teach precision and patience. Sophia arrived first, clutching a notebook and a tiny magnifying glass she had borrowed from her school lab. She smiled nervously, glancing at the array of materials. "I hope I'm not too late," she said. "You are on time," I said, "and it's not about arriving. It's about being present." The other students trickled in slowly, each carrying a personal curiosity they had brought in lieu of confidence. A young man carried a small carved wooden box. A woman brought a tattered watercolor she said had belonged to her grandmother. One by one, they placed their objects carefully in the center of the table, as if laying down their own uncertainties. I began the session with a simple instruction. "We are going to learn to see," I said. "Not to judge, not to fix, not to measure against anyone else, just see." We started with the wooden box. The man traced the carvings with his fingers. "It's crooked," he said. "It's not perfect." I shook my head. "Crooked is history. Crooked is character. Listen to the lines, watch how they meet and fail and meet again. The box is telling you its story. You must learn to hear it." By mid-morning, the shop smelled faintly of polish and tea. The students had begun to move in the rhythm of attention, slow, deliberate, curious. They asked fewer questions about me and more about the objects. The room vibrated quietly with concentration. Between demonstrations, I sat at the edge of the table, watching. Sophia whispered something about the lace she had studied the previous week. Her eyes glimmered with pride and fear at the same time. I nodded and said, "Let the material speak. Let yourself respond." By lunch, the students had begun to notice one another. They shared stories of mistakes, small victories, and discoveries. I could feel the energy of the room shift from instruction to community. Something intangible had been established. A rhythm, a trust, a recognition that what we do with our hands can shape how we feel inside. When class ended, Sophia lingered. "Can I ask a question?" she said. "Of course," I said. "How do you know when a piece is truly restored?" I smiled. "When you stop wanting to own it and start wanting to serve it. Restoration is not about control. It's about understanding what it needs to breathe again." Her eyes softened. "I think I understand." That afternoon, I stepped outside for a breath of air. The city moved with its usual quiet chaos. Buses, cars, people hurrying along the sidewalks. I realized I hadn't felt this grounded in years, not since the workshop had begun. The students had brought life back to the shop, transformed the space from storage into a room for learning, listening, and care. When I returned, a letter awaited me. The Institute had sent photographs from the Valence Chapel. I traced the inscription again, to the one who taught silence to endure. I closed my eyes and let the words settle. They felt like a bridge between what I had accomplished and what remained to be done. Later, I received a text from my mother. She had visited Sophia in school and had spoken with her teacher. The message was simple: "Your niece looks happier than I have seen her in months. Thank you for being her guide." I allowed myself a small smile. Even across distance and difference, love could still move in careful gestures. By evening, the shop was quiet. I walked among the tables, straightening tools, checking objects, and making notes for the next session. Each piece reflected the day's learning. Each corner of the room absorbed the energy of focus and discovery. It was still my space, yet no longer mine alone. I paused by the window and looked out over the street. The reflections of the shop lights danced in the puddles, fractured like memory. I thought of Geneva, of the directors, of Isabella Valette, the silent patron. I realized that silence, attention, and care were not just practices, they were legacies. A soft knock at the door made me turn. It was Felicity. She stepped inside slowly, looking at the tables and the materials laid out. For a moment, we simply observed. "You've created something," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "Not for me, for those who care to see." She nodded and left without another word, leaving the door slightly ajar. The gesture felt like permission, quiet and complete. As I closed up for the night, I wrote a new sentence on the board for the next session. Attention and patience are the first steps to understanding what is fragile and what endures. I switched off the lights, leaving the space ready for the students to return. Outside, the city hummed softly under the first frost of evening. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not the kind that demands applause, but the kind that sustains work over years, the kind that teaches even the silent observer that presence itself can heal. The next Saturday arrived with a thin sun, pale enough to make the snow glisten without warmth. The shop smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, and I moved through it with a sense of expectation, though I did not yet know why. I set the small tables in their usual formation, preparing the objects for class. Each piece had its place, a lesson embedded in its position. Sophia arrived first, as usual, her notebook clutched tight. She looked at me and asked, "Are we doing the same things today?" I shook my head. "Today is about reflection, observation, listening to what is hidden." As the other students arrived, I could feel a subtle tension in the room. One of the adult participants, a visiting curator, had arranged a few of his own pieces on the tables, small panels he had thought worthless, objects abandoned by the auction houses. The act of laying them out changed the air. There was curiosity and caution, a quiet negotiation between old assumptions and new attention. Midway through the morning, there was a knock at the door. I looked up and found Felicity standing there. She did not smile. She removed her gloves and coat, her eyes scanning the room as if measuring its boundaries. "You're teaching again," she said, voice soft, almost neutral. "I didn't expect this." "I never expect you to expect me," I said. She stepped inside and moved slowly among the tables. The students paused in their work, watching, unsure whether to continue or wait for instruction. I gestured for them to carry on. The room remained focused, but the tension was noticeable. Felicity's presence was a statement, not a question. She stopped beside the panel I had restored last week. "You've changed the room," she said. Her voice had a strange mix of admiration and disbelief. "It's alive in a way it wasn't before." I nodded. "Life is a careful arrangement. Observation, attention, care." She turned toward me then, stepping closer. "Do you remember what it was like at the family table, the night of your father's birthday, the way you left?" "Yes," I said. "I remember every detail." Her eyes flickered. "And you were right to leave, but you also left questions behind. Questions only family can ask. You've built this room, but what about us?" I walked slowly toward her, keeping my hands open. "This room isn't about proving anything. It's about presence, listening, learning. You can participate if you choose, or observe from the doorway, or leave entirely. The choice is yours." She considered this. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I came because I want to understand. Not just the work, but you. I want to see how you became the woman who does this." I studied her face. It was sincere, but guarded. I wondered how much of her fear had come from the years she measured me against herself, against our parents, against expectations she had inherited. "Do you know why the students follow?" I asked. "Why they come week after week?" Felicity shook her head. "Because they feel seen," I said. "Even when they are uncertain, even when they have made mistakes. They know this room won't judge them, won't demand perfection. That's what keeps them here. That's what kept me here." She looked down at the tables, at the objects, at the delicate balance of care and observation. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted. I reached for a small ceramic cup, cracked along one side. I held it up to the light so the students could see the fracture. "This cup is like life," I said. "Its flaws are part of its story. You cannot erase them. You can only honor them. That is what I teach." The room was quiet. Even the students were listening without speaking. Felicity's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then she spoke again, this time in a low, careful voice. "There's something I need to tell you, something I never said before." I nodded. "I'm listening." She looked down at her hands, then back at me. "Our father, he sold the collection after Mother's passing. The works you always thought were lost in a fire, the pieces that shaped your understanding, he sold them to save the company. He never told anyone, not even me, not until now." I felt a hollow ache open inside me. Every brushstroke I had made to recover, every panel restored, every lesson built, it had unknowingly begun with what our family had lost. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked softly. "Because," she said, "the first piece you restored after Geneva, it was one of them. The auction where you bought it back, it was the very work he sold. You didn't know it, and he didn't know you, reclaim it, but it's part of our family's story, and it was meant to be in your hands." The realization struck me with a quiet force. This was not just art. This was reconciliation, waiting to happen across time, across absence, across ignorance. The work I thought I did alone had been guided, subtly, by a legacy of loss and preservation. I placed the cup back on the table and let the students continue without interruption. My hands rested on the edge of the workbench, steady now, accepting the weight of history. Felicity remained at the doorway, silent, observing the way the room breathed, learning the lesson she had never understood in words alone. The air in the shop felt heavier, yet lighter at the same time, as if a line had been drawn and the echo of what was lost could finally begin to be reclaimed. I understood then that restoration was not only about objects, it was about life, memory, and forgiveness. This was the moment the mirror had appeared. Not in glass, not in reflection, but in the careful observation of another, in the recognition that even family mistakes could seed growth. The main twist revealed itself quietly. The piece that had begun my workshop's revival was never just art. It was a thread connecting past, present, and future. I whispered to myself, everything begins with what is lost, and everything survives in what we choose to save. After the revelation, the shop felt simultaneously heavier and lighter, as if air had shifted its weight to accommodate the truth. Felicity stayed near the doorway, observing the students without interference. I moved among the tables, letting my hands adjust the objects, but my mind followed the hidden path that had led me here. Sophia noticed my preoccupation and asked, "Are you all right, Aunt Brianna?" I looked at her and smiled. "I am more than all right, I'm learning." The students worked quietly, tracing lines with delicate fingers, noting the grain of wood, the uneven edges of fabric, the faint brush strokes on paper. Their attentiveness reminded me why I began this workshop, to honor patience and attention as tools for understanding. And now, the lesson extended beyond materials. Felicity spoke softly, stepping closer to one of the tables. "I never realized," she said, "all these years I thought your work was just hobbies and side projects, but it's not, it's meaning." I nodded. "Yes, and sometimes meaning is buried under layers of silence, waiting for someone to care enough to lift it gently." She hesitated, then asked, "Did Father know?" "Yes," I said. "He acted in what he believed was necessity. He preserved the company, yes, but he also ensured the pieces could return to their rightful hands eventually. I didn't know it then, but now I see his intent. Preservation takes many forms." Her eyes softened, though the skepticism lingered. "And all this time you thought it was lost?" I shrugged. "I thought I was alone in reclaiming what mattered. Now I realize I was guided indirectly by his choices. That changes everything, doesn't it?" She nodded quietly. The students glanced up, sensing the subtle shift in the room. The air was no longer simply for observation. It carried the weight of revelation, the presence of understanding. One of the students held a small lace panel, questioning whether a tear should be repaired or honored as part of the piece's history. I moved closer and said, "Respect what each line tells you. Sometimes restoration is intervention. Sometimes it is witness. The choice is not always yours, but your attention shapes what endures." Sophia watched, absorbing the guidance. "It feels sacred," she whispered. "Yes," I said, "and that's exactly why we proceed carefully." Felicity lingered by the window, looking out at the street as if seeing it for the first time. Then she said, "I never understood how much responsibility comes with your kind of work. It's not just about objects. It's about people, about memory, about connections." I met her gaze. "Exactly, that is why we do it. Preservation is not only about saving what exists, it's about acknowledging what has been lost and honoring its return. That is the legacy we inherit, whether we recognize it at first or later." She nodded. "I see now, I think I finally see." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a light snow began to fall again, dusting the street. The students moved carefully, arranging their objects with newfound care. The room seemed suspended in quiet reverence. Finally, Felicity spoke again. You've created more than a workshop. You've built a bridge between the past and those who will follow, and I want to understand it better. I want to be part of this, even if only as an observer. You may, I said, but only if you watch with attention, not judgment. Only if you respect what each person brings and leaves intact. She smiled faintly, and I felt a subtle shift. A distance that had existed between us all these years, measured by expectations and assumptions, began to contract. It was not forgiveness yet, nor complete reconciliation, but it was the first quiet acknowledgement that the space between us could be crossed. The students cleaned their tables, packing away objects with careful hands. Sophia lingered to help me close the shutters. She looked at me and asked, "Will you always teach like this?" "As long as someone is willing to listen," I said, "and someone will always be willing." After they left, I sat alone in the shop and reflected on the morning's revelations. The cup with the crack from the previous week still sat on the table. I held it gently, turning it in my hands. Each imperfection, each fracture told a story, some of loss, some of survival, all of attention. And the inscription from Valence came to mind, "To the one who taught silence to endure." I realized then that the same principle applied to my family. My father, through his own silence and choices, had preserved what mattered. Felicity, now willing to observe rather than judge, had taken the first step toward understanding. And I, by creating a space where observation, patience, and care were honored, had made it possible for these reconciliations to occur organically. I placed the cup back on the table and whispered to the room, "This is what endurance looks like. Not absence, not denial, not avoidance, but attention and the courage to hold what is fragile with respect." The snow outside thickened, softening the edges of the city. I lit a small lamp above the panel, the warm light falling across the objects. Shadows stretched long across the floor, and I realized that for the first time in years, every piece, every lesson, every revelation, and every act of preservation, in art, in memory, and in family, had converged into a single, quiet truth. The shop smelled of polished wood and fresh paper when I unlocked it that morning. I arranged the tables carefully, placing the ceramic pieces, panels, and textiles in a manner that allowed light to play across them. I had sent word the night before. The family was invited for a private viewing. No announcements, no formalities. This would not be a lecture, not a presentation. It would be a space for attention, for witnessing, for understanding. Felicity arrived first. She stepped into the shop slowly, removing her coat and hanging it near the door. Her eyes swept the room as though cataloging the objects, the arrangement, and for a moment she gave a small nod and moved toward the window, where light illuminated a series of restored panels. "You did all this?" she asked quietly. "I did not," I said. "The room did, we all did." Sophia appeared next, her notebook in hand, smiling as if she had been expecting Felicity. She greeted her aunt and set her notebook on a small side table. "It's ready," she said. Soon my mother arrived, followed by my father. Their footsteps echoed lightly against the wooden floor. They looked around, astonished, hesitant, not quite sure whether they were entering a shop or a sanctuary. I gestured for them to take seats where they liked. I walked among the tables, touching the edges of a panel, the corner of a box, each movement deliberate, slow. "This room is not a lesson in art alone," I said. "It is a lesson in attention, in patience, in understanding what is fragile and what endures. You may observe, you may ask questions, but you may not control what is in it. Everything here is preserved, not to impress, but to reveal." My father's brow furrowed, the first sign of discomfort since Geneva. Felicity leaned against a table, arms folded, curious, cautious. My mother's eyes softened as she glanced from panel to panel, sensing the intention behind every placement. I motioned to Sophia. "Show them the lace." Sophia carefully lifted a delicate antique lace, holding it over the light. "Notice how it bends under the fingers," she said. "The edges fray, but the pattern persists. Preservation is understanding what can survive and what must be supported." My father reached forward. "And these were in your possession all this time?" "Yes," I said. "Some have traveled far, some were thought lost. All are here because they survived attention and care, not neglect or omission." Felicity's eyes lingered on a panel I had reclaimed from the auction house after Geneva. "This one," she said, voice tight. "You bought it back yourself?" I nodded. "It was lost to the family, sold long ago to maintain the company. Now it's here where it can be understood, just as the past can be recovered when given attention." My mother reached for the panel, lightly tracing a brushstroke. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And it survived because you cared." I moved to the center of the room, where the original cup with the crack from part 5 still rested. I held it up to the light. See how the imperfection tells its story? Restoration is not about erasing history. It is about honoring it while ensuring it can continue. That is what I have done with every piece, and it is what I have done with my life. A silence fell. No one spoke immediately. The gravity of observation weighed heavily, but gently. Finally, Felicity took a step forward. "I think I understand now," she said. "You were never hiding, you were preserving, and we never noticed that was what mattered." I smiled faintly. Some things cannot be rushed or explained with words alone. They require patience and attention. You can witness that now, or you can choose to remain unaware. The choice is yours. My father spoke, voice lower than usual. "You have accomplished what we never could. Not just the work, but the way you keep the legacy alive while remaining yourself. That is remarkable." I let the weight of his acknowledgement settle. "Legacy," I said, "is not inherited. It is observed, preserved, and respected, and sometimes it must be restored." I gestured to the students who had participated in the workshops, now sitting quietly around the edges. They have learned to see. They have learned to understand, just as we all must learn, sometimes too late, that the value of history lies not in ownership, but in care. Felicity's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You've created a room where everyone is allowed to be seen, without judgment." "Yes," I said. "For the first time, that includes you." I placed the final object, the panel from the auction, back on the table. It caught the sunlight and fractured it into gold lines. "This is the full circle," I said. "The pieces lost, reclaimed, and preserved. The students, the family, the work, it all converges here. Attention made it whole. Care made it endure. And this," I gestured to the room, "is the story we tell when we allow silence to guide us." Then I leaned back slightly, letting the revelation settle. The twist that had guided all the years of secrecy, the auctions, the reclamations, the silent work, finally revealed itself. The pieces thought lost by the family had never truly vanished. They had been waiting for the one who would understand, restore, and preserve them with honesty, patience, and respect. That one was me. And in creating this space, I had woven the past, the present, and the future into a single, enduring legacy. My mother's eyes glistened. Felicity's expression softened entirely. My father exhaled, the first sound of quiet pride I had ever heard. Sophia looked at me with awe, holding the lace as though it were a token of everything she could aspire to. In that moment, the room felt complete. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Every crack, every imperfection, every misjudged action now found its place in the story. Every silence, every careful attention, every small act of preservation had led to this. I whispered to the room, though no one heard except me, "Endurance is not absence, it is care. And this is what survives." The sunlight that morning fell at a low angle, casting long lines across the shop floor. I unlocked the door early, allowing the quiet to settle before the family arrived. The tables gleamed under the light, the objects arranged with precision, yet free to tell their own stories. I placed the final panel from the auction center in the middle, letting its fractured edges catch the sun and reflect gold onto the walls. Felicity arrived first, stepping inside without knocking. She paused, taking in the room, and then smiled faintly. "It's different," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It's alive because everyone here contributes, not because it belongs to any one of us." Sophia followed soon after, carrying a small portfolio. She arranged her sketches on one of the tables. "This is where I feel I learn best," she said. "Watching, touching, thinking." The other students began to trickle in. They carried their objects, each with its own story and history. Some were delicate, some were worn, each was handled with reverence, each was a lesson in attention and care. The room hummed softly with focus. Then my mother arrived, followed by my father. They lingered at the doorway, unsure whether to enter fully or remain observers. I gestured for them to come closer. They did. Felicity remained near the back, observing, hesitant but willing. I moved to the center of the room and held up the panel that had been sold years ago to preserve the company. "This piece was thought lost," I said. "It was sold and it was reclaimed not just by me, but by care, attention, and patience. What you see here is not a restoration only of art, but of understanding, connection, and responsibility." My father exhaled slowly. I never thought it would come back like this," he said. "I was trying to preserve the family. I didn't understand the cost to you." "You acted as you knew how," I said gently. "But restoration is more than intention. It requires attention, honesty, and patience. Those are what allowed this piece to survive and what allows us to understand each other now." Felicity stepped forward. "I see it now. It's not about control or ownership. It's about observing, listening, and caring. That's what you've done here. Yes, I said. Exactly. I walked among the tables, allowing everyone to touch the objects, to feel the texture, the weight, the imperfection. This is how we bridge gaps, I said. Between past and present, between loss and return, between silence and attention. You can participate or you can watch, but respect must always guide you. Sophia showed her lace panel to my mother. Look, she said. Every tear, every fray is part of its story. We don't fix it to erase history. We preserve it to honor what came before. My mother reached out, lightly tracing the delicate threads. I understand, she whispered. I see now what you have been teaching all this time. My father stood beside her, nodding slowly. And I understand that legacy is not simply inherited, he said. It must be preserved, respected, and restored with care. You've done that, Brianna. I gestured toward the students. And these are the next generation of observers, learners, and preservers. They will continue the work, each in their own way, because attention and care are contagious. Felicity moved closer, standing beside me. I want to help, she said. Not to direct, but to learn, to observe, and to participate when I am allowed. You may, I said, as long as you respect the work, the process, and the people who contribute. We spent the rest of the day moving among the objects, sharing observations, and allowing the students to practice delicate techniques. Each person's hands, careful and attentive, mirrored the lessons I had learned over years of silent work. As evening fell, I gathered the family and students near the center table. I held up the original cup with the crack along its side. This cup teaches the final lesson, I said. Imperfection is not failure. Every crack, every flaw tells a story. Preservation is about understanding and honoring those stories. The lesson applies to art, to life, and to family. My father, mother, and Felicity all nodded, their faces softened. Even the students looked up, realizing that what they learned here extended beyond the objects. It was a lesson in patience, understanding, and reconciliation. I lowered the cup. The twist, I said, is this: the works thought lost, the mistakes we feared, and the silences we endured, all of it was never outside our reach. Preservation is not only about restoring objects. It's about restoring understanding, autonomy, and care. That is what survives. Felicity smiled, a mixture of admiration and humility. I finally understand your choices, she said. My mother reached out, touching my arm gently. And I finally understand you. My father's voice was quiet but firm. You did more than we could have imagined, and you did it without compromise to yourself. That is the true legacy. I looked around the room at the objects, the students, and my family. The workshop had become a sanctuary, a bridge, a place of reconciliation. Every crack, every imperfection, every careful touch told the story of endurance and care. I whispered softly, to know one and everyone. Attention and care preserve what is fragile, reveal what is hidden, and restore what was once lost. That is what survives. And in that moment, the room held a quiet, complete understanding. The family, the workshop, the objects, and I were all aligned in the truth. The past could be reclaimed, autonomy could be preserved, and love, carefully attended, could endure.